Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. We have a great show for you today. We're going to be talking today about trauma bonds, and it's interesting because it's come up quite a bit in my work this week, and I felt like it was the right thing to talk about. So we're going to be talking about what trauma bonds are versus what real love is, and how to really know the difference, and it's going to come pretty clear on what that difference is. What are the signs that we're dealing with when we're in what I consider a trauma bond loop, and how those cycles, what the cycles are, how they begin, how we fall into them, how we get lulled into it. It's going to be an eye-opening show today. It's going to help you. There might be situations that you're dealing with. This could be also applied to a family member or friend. Many times when our friends or family members are in trauma bonds, we have a tendency of giving them advice, but it seems like they don't take it. Or if they take it, they waver back and forth. And when they waver back and forth, they just decide to keep sticking with it. And you might say, gosh, I see the problems, there's some issues that you need to see. And maybe they come to you for the problematic situation and you feel like you've heard it more times than you want to actually talk about it. And so I think this will be really helpful. So whether you're dealing with a trauma bond cycle in your life, or a good friend of yours or a family member is, and you're watching it from the sidelines and it's painful to watch, or it's overwhelming or stressful to watch, this show is really going to give you some information and really probably be handy to understanding it. So let's begin talking about the cycles of a trauma bond, because I think this is interesting. And why the bonding is so unique and solid is because of the cycles of abuse, whether it's mental or emotional, physical. Usually it's more, mental abuse, right? So it's more of the manipulation, the gaslighting, the making somebody feel bad about themselves, putting them down, that sort of thing. The devaluation, which is devaluing them, right? So devaluing them, having them question their value, you're questioning their value, and then ultimately the positive reward, because that's also part of it too, right? Because if something was just always negative or painful, you probably wouldn't stick with it, right? There has to be a reward, right? A treat of some sort. And so that positive reinforcement creates the pattern, creates the program, creates the cycle that we end up kind of getting addicted. Well, I should say not kind of, getting addicted to this type of bond. And so because of the trauma of abuse, and because of the combination of the devaluation, and because of the combination of the reinforcement, I have coined a phrase that I like to say, the blender of emotion. And so many of us who are in trauma bonds, have been in a trauma bond, are recovering out of a trauma bond. So many of you watching this right now might say, hey, I'm recovering out of a trauma bond. I'm pulling the pieces of my life back together. And yes, you're right. I was in a blender of emotion, and that blender of emotion is all the feelings at once, right? Because you have these feelings of care, and you have these feelings of feelings of love and sympathy and empathy and all these things. At the same time, there's all this other stuff going on. And so what happens in a trauma bond is that both people are in this relationship, and it's a perfect storm for a lot of things to happen that aren't very positive, a lot of things to happen that are very unhealthy, and a lot of cycle patterns to be relived from the beginning of one's life into the same part of their life. And so it's interesting how the abuse alternates, right, between like this kindness, but also don't forget, in these relationships, we also have intimacy, right? So in this relationship, on top of all this, we add intimacy, sex into the equation, right? So that even adds another layer of confusion, right? So in this trauma bond, in this blender of emotion, we're dealing with constant confusion, right? We're dealing with confusion. We're feeling confused because of all these different things that are happening. And that's what we really want to look at today, because I think when we can look at this today, we're going to really understand it for what it is. And so the first thing that I want to talk about when we talk about the little pieces of the trauma bond is I want to talk about what a lot of people have said, is that when you're getting these little pieces of love And these little pieces of affection, they call it, what do we call it? We call it crumbs, right? Crumbing, crumbs, that kind of thing, breadcrumbs, that sort of thing. And why do we call it breadcrumbs? Because you don't get the whole loaf, right? So that's one of the biggest things, is that you're not getting the whole loaf of affection or love. You're getting this little piece given to you at just the proper time to kind of keep you enmeshed in the situation. So you get just a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit, right? But the thing is that's so interesting is that you get this little crumb, but the crumb means so much, right? So, if you've ever been in a trauma bond, or you're currently in a trauma bond, or you're overcoming and recovering from a trauma bond, you know that the crumbs that you got appeared to be the full loaf, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. They're being nice. Oh, this feels so good. Or oh, they did make me a sandwich, or whatever it looks like. Or they did pick up the bottle of shampoo I needed, or whatever it is. But amongst the abuse, the devaluation, all of that stuff. So the crumbs are interesting because the crumbs keep us in it. Okay. And, it's interesting because once you start getting used to receiving the crumbs, once you start getting used to it, it's interesting how we can manipulate our own mind to believe that the crumbs are something that's amazing, right? Oh my gosh. I had a friend of mine one time that we were talking about the crumbs, and they said, occasionally they would get me, a gummy candy, or they would get me a candy bar at the gas station, and it meant the world to me. And I remember how important that candy bar was. But see, that was the only nice thing that had been done in a really long time. And you understand that that's what really crumbing is. So think about it from that angle. If you've experienced that, it's these small things. And I'm not saying that every act of kindness needs to be huge, but I'm saying when those are the only acts of kindness, that's why we call it crumbs, right? Okay. Another thing that's interesting about the trauma bond is what I would consider the drama piece. So there's constant drama. There's constant ups and downs in the relationship. But what I've also found is that one person is constantly trying to explain themselves to the other person. Okay. And I've done a lot of work on this. I have a master class out, and one of the coaching sessions is directly talking about over explaining why we do it, how to stop. And one of the things that I found, though, is that in this cycle, we have a tendency of one person over explaining, constantly trying to be understood, constantly trying to be accepted. See, that's also part of the trauma bond too, because I found that oftentimes in a trauma bond, one person will tell the other person that they are selfish, that they're evil, that they're horrible, that nobody would ever want to be with them. God, I can't even believe I'm with you, because nobody would ever live with you. Nobody would ever live with you or be with you. I mean, my God, you're lucky to have me in your life. I mean, I don't think anybody could deal with you. I mean, your kids don't even like you. I mean, so that's one of the things that's interesting about the trauma bond, because you begin to believe that you're actually lucky to have this person. I know. I mean, it's wild. It's like, you're lulled into believing that you're hanging out with like the Grim Reaper and this is going to be a great night. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't think it's going to end well. But it's like, think about it from that perspective. It's very interesting. And the ups and downs is what gives the addictive quality to this type of relationship. Because you know what I'm saying? I mean, when there's not a lot of drama in a relationship, there's not a lot of fight or flight. When there's not, when you're not having to prove yourself and prove your value. And I think we go into these trauma bonds proving ourselves and proving our value because we've gone through this before. This is not new. This is something that we've experienced when we were younger, right? Many of you experienced it when, you were being, mom and dad. Mom and dad, there was one parent that didn't get you, didn't understand you, didn't accept what you said, so you find yourself constantly explaining yourself. And so a lot of times in the trauma bond when we're adults, it's a direct correlation, right, to our core wounds. To the wounds that we had as a child, our core wounds. And we can't just throw away the core wounds. We can't just hide it under a rug. We can't just act like it doesn't exist, because our core wounds come out in every single thing that we do. Okay. And because we haven't dealt with it yet. If we haven't dealt with it and we haven't worked on our core wounds, we can't get past them because it's going to come out in every relationship we have. It's going to be exposed to some degree, and it's also going to trigger us, right, to stay in certain relationships based on what we're used to. I have folks that I work with ask me, they're like, how did I fall for this? How did I fall for this? How did I let this happen? How did I go into this relationship? I feel stupid. I'm like, you're not stupid. Stop saying that. There's no judgment here. The last thing you are is stupid. It's actually the fact that you've been accustomed to this, because if you've never been accustomed to having to prove yourself, if you've never been accustomed to trying to over-explain to get somebody to accept your reality, if you've never had to, over-explain or try to prove your value or feel lesser than and trying to pull yourself out of this hole, you would never be here because this wouldn't make sense to you. The entire relationship would not make sense to you because you wouldn't understand the other person, because you would say, wait, this is confusing to me. Because this doesn't seem right, because this is not my normal. I don't even know where this is coming from. See, trauma bonds become the normal because that's what we were kind of exposed to. I think it's interesting, too, in a trauma bond. One of the things that I find so interesting is that the good times in these types of relationships make you forget the bad times, right? And it's consistent. And it makes you forget the bad times. It makes you forget it. And so it becomes this kind of rinse, repeat kind of situation over and over again that I find so interesting, is that when we're in it and you have like the negative kind of times that you're dealing with, all of a sudden there's this like crumb, there's this, and there's this fun time. And because we're in this fight or flight, and because we have all this stuff going on all at one time, and, there's addictive quality with it as well. And we'll talk more about that. But, it's kind of the perfect storm, because in that moment of fun or in that moment of kindness, it's like that award situation where you feel like we're getting an award, and we can actually kind of get a dopamine hit from that, which as much as kind of an addiction is, right? And so we need to think about that, because that's something that's really important for us to look at, to understand, because I think sometimes what happens is you look at the good times and you focus on those good times and you forget what just happened, yesterday. And sometimes the cycles in these relationships can be longer and sometimes they can be shorter. And what I mean by that is that you can have a length of time in between the good times and the not so good times, or the really bad times, or you can actually go back up and down quite frequently. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be days, it could be hours with some relationships. And I feel like that actually increases the fight or flight mode, in the defense mode even more. And so that puts us in that blender of emotion. And so we're going to be talking more about that here today in the show. We're going to also talk about the risk factors of being in a trauma bond, what those higher risk factors are, and some of the stages of the trauma bond, so we can really understand the stages as well, because we're going to decipher, we're going to figure this all out, at least to a degree of being able to identify it, understand it, and be able to figure out how to get a plan to get out. So stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Berges. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes. Warm. Let's check the temperature. I'm like, I'm warm in here. Holy hand grenade. Let's see. I'm starting to think that one of those cords to the mixer and to the quartet, something's wrong with it, and that's why we can't get the audio. Okay. Thank y'all for tuning in. Commercial break. Yeah, I think it must be one of these. I think it's like one of the line ends or something, or the line out. Yeah, I think it's gotta be something. Now that I say that, Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're about to go into our next segment here. I think in a couple of seconds here. How does the audio sound to you?
Oh, it sounds really good.
Good.
Nice, clear. Nothing's peaking.
Seems like a long break. There you go. Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. On today's show, I've been talking about trauma bonds, what trauma bonds are, how to know when you're in it, how to be able to see and be aware of the cycle and pattern in your life. And right before the break, we've been talking about crumbs. We had been talking about the crumbs of love and validation. We had talked about some of the drama, the ups and downs, trying to over-explain ourselves, to prove our value, to prove our truth, and how a lot of times we can fall into the trap of doing that, right? We fall into the trap of trying to prove ourselves in a hope of having validation, right? In a hope of getting validated. And I find that to be interesting because a lot of times when we are needing to get validated in a relationship, this is just a connecting. This is just from what happened before when we were younger, the need for validation, the need for acceptance from a parental unit normally. And then we find ourselves again in a relationship that we're having to jump through the same hoops, prove the same things, do the same work. And it seems so normal because guess what? It is our normal. It doesn't mean it's healthy. There's a very big difference between healthy and normal. One of the other interesting things about a trauma bond is that, many times more often than not, you feel like you're walking on eggshells, right? You don't really know what you can say, and I think really one of the big things about a trauma bond is that usually what happens is that one person does not have the luxury of having their own feelings. They're not allowed to express their own feelings, right? Because their feelings are not essential. And a lot of times through manipulation and gaslighting, when somebody does bring up a point that's very important, the other person will manipulate and put them down, right? Because it's almost like apologizing in the same sentence, putting somebody down in the same point, right? It's not a real apology. Right. And so there's a lot of different levels of manipulation, but walking on eggshells is a big thing because you don't know how the other person's going to respond. I also find that in a trauma bond, more often than not, we don't have a lot of great communication because it doesn't seem like either one of us really understand the other. And it seems that one of us is overly explaining more often than not, but the other person's never really understanding from whence we came, right? Because they don't understand what we're trying to explain. And usually, even in trying to explain ourselves or our own emotions, we end up tapping and triggering in to the victim reality of the other person, where the other person's telling us how they're a victim and how we're mistreating them. And so there's multiple levels here that we have to be able to understand. The other one too is that how it's so hard to leave the relationship because the program has been so ingrained, right? When the program's been ingrained for a long period of time, it may be hard to leave. And it's interesting too how I believe that when you're in a relationship like that, trying to prove your value, trying to prove yourself, trying to make your emotions known or be understood. And I think a lot of you fall into this category. It's like, I just want to be understood by my significant other, but it doesn't seem like anything I do or say allows for this understanding. And I feel like I'm hitting a wall, emotionally, mentally, physically, because I just don't seem to be able to communicate how I'm feeling. And that can be very tragic and challenging because it can feel very isolating because the person doesn't understand where we're coming from. But also, it's almost like they don't also want to accept how we feel about where we are. Like, we don't have the right to feel a certain way. And so a lot of this is the perfect storm because it goes back to both people dealing with their core wounds, their childhood wounds, whatever, core, childhood, whatever you'd like to talk about, but basically the unresolved past trauma, right? And so we're acting it out right again on a new play, on a new stage, and we're walking through this trying to understand this because it's something we're used to, and it's based on our need for validation and acceptance. And I want to talk about, when we return, we're going to talk about the risk factors. Like, what are some of the factors that are a good indication that we may find ourselves in a trauma bond? Like, what are the things that you may possess or have that could actually kind of fortify more of a trauma bond or put you into that, as well as we're going to talk about the different stages of trauma bonding and what that looks like, and then what we can do to begin to let go of this programming and begin to move on and be successful in finding our true identity and living our true life. So stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Berges, will be back in. I'll be back this time. Well, I'll be back this time in 2 shakes. That's better. Hi, guys. Thank you for tuning in. How are you doing? Good to have y'all. Okay, Brian, good to see you. How are you doing? Marie, good to see you. How are you? Patris, how are you doing? We'll talk a little bit about breaking the cycle for sure. Definitely, Brian. I will explain. Thank you for talking about this. I'm going through it. Okay, great. Patris, I'm so glad that you have tuned in. We'll be talking a lot about this, how to understand it, how to understand the cycle patterns. All the good feelings plus resentment, constant ruminating, stay or go. Gwen, thank you so much for your message. Oh, yes, and I love my dog too. I totally get it. Totally understand your perspective. James, Oren, great for you to tune in. Thank you so much. Liberty, glad you tuned in. Trauma bonding is not healthy. Hey, Larry, great to see you. Hello from London. Annie, can it be fixed? Yes, I think anything can be fixed to some degree. I mean, I think that when both people are aware and mindful and see the situation clearly, we can make big changes. Derek, great to see you. Jacqueline, great to see you. Oh, yes, I remember the license plate. I'm so glad I sent that to you. I love you too, sweetheart. Thank you so much for reaching out. I'm glad that you're getting. This is great. I feel good for you, and this is a good group to help you and to provide that structure. Sarah, great to see you. Thank you. Cesar, Great to see you, Annie. Thank you. Ammonia, great to see you. Pamela, great to see you. I can help you. You can if you'd like to, you can go to ashleyberges.com, click on that contact page, and you can just send me an email. So just go to the website ashleyberges.com, click on the contact page, and you can send me an email, and I'll respond right back to you, Ammonia. Thank you for reaching out. Cesar, I understand. It's stressful because you have so much time vested in it. Big D business. I understand there's certain reasons why we can't leave. We just got to be able to create boundaries around it as much as we can if we're in that type of circumstance. Okay. Rhonda, great to see you. Naz, great to see you. How are you doing? Paxton, great to see you. I think they can change, but they have to be mindful and self aware. Okay, so it all starts with self awareness. I think anytime somebody has self awareness and the desire to make changes, that's a win win situation. Without those two things, unfortunately, I don't think we can change. Fi, good to see you. I'm so glad that you reached out. Hi from Poland. This is great. I'm glad that you're here. We're about to come back from break here in just one moment. Okay. Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. On today's show, we've been talking about identifying and discussing trauma bonds, right? And right before the break, I had talked that I'd really want to bring up some of the risk factors, the reasons why we find ourselves more in a trauma bond. The first risk factor that I find is the self-esteem component, right? When we have a lower self-esteem, we can be definite targets in the situation because the manipulation and gaslighting can become so vicious that we begin to believe ourselves to not be very good or to not be lovable or to not be a nice person or be a selfish person or a mean person or whatever it is that person's telling us that we are, right? And if we do have a lower self-esteem, we tend to believe it. Maybe we don't stand up for ourselves. And a lot of times when we have a lower self-esteem, we actually don't create the boundaries that we need with people to keep our values intact. And what I mean by that is that we all have values. A lot of times we don't realize what our values are. Okay, these values define who we are. They make up who we are. They create our reality, correct? But it's interesting. We don't really focus on it. We don't really identify the values. But when we're in a trauma bond, what we're doing is we're allowing this other person constantly to walk all over what matters to us. Okay, we're allowing this person to use this to walk all over us in this situation. Okay, and so they keep taking away the things that actually matter to us most, which makes us have a lower and lower self-esteem, right? Because we feel like we can't leave. One of the things that I also find that that's a higher risk factor for a trauma bond is financial difficulties, right? If we have financial difficulties, if we're stuck in a situation because we don't have the finances to move out on our own, right? If we don't have the finances to have our own place, Another is a health issue. When we have health issues and we're unable to take care of ourselves completely, and we depend on other people, we can be in a trauma bond and not understand how to get out, because not only we might know that it's happening, but it might be hard because we have all these other issues, playing a factor. One of the biggest things, though, is the past trauma, right? So the past trauma that we've gone through, whether it's with our mother or father or grandmother or grandfather or relative, whatever that looks like, that past trauma that we went through that was not resolved or understood, figured out, and let go of is transpiring again in this current situation. Okay, and that's why it's so magnified and so painful a lot of times. And that's why it's so easily addictive, because it almost feels like that person knows you. It's almost like when you first meet that person in the first beginning of this relationship, it seems so fast. Right? It's like, oh my gosh, it was like, because within a few weeks, that component of understanding them or feeling like they understand you becomes so weirdly and quickly solid. One of the things that I find that's a very interesting telltale of a trauma bond is that the other person may ask you to do things that go against your values. Okay. Now, and we'll talk about the value thing here at the end of the show, because this is one of the biggest golden nuggets there is. And it's something that I work with clients on ultimately to try to understand themselves. But one of the things that I really find as a telltale sign with the trauma bond is that the other person will push you to the limits and push you to the limits of your boundaries, right? And we don't have boundaries usually in a trauma bond. That's why we're in a trauma bond. But they'll push us to do things that we would normally not do. They push us to do things that we don't feel good about doing. But then they turn around and make us feel good somewhere on the end, giving us crumbs of validations or whatever it is to make us feel better about doing it, instead of doing the right thing and not trying to push our buttons and not trying to run all over our values. Do you see how that's interesting? So it's like, if I push you to do something and you feel really, really bad about it, that you start crying and you're upset and we have an issue with that, and I'm over there wiping the tears from your face, that's like a crumb of validation. But really what I should have done is saying, hey, I'm really sorry that I pushed that with you. You do not have to do this. Let's stop this. Take care of your stuff that you need to take care of, okay? Me wiping the tears off your face in a positive way with a Kleenex and a pat on the back is not really solving anything. Basically, what I've done is I've manipulated you to feel better about breaking your own values. I've just made you feel better about breaking your own values. And guess what? I got off pretty scot-free with just being able to wipe the tears from your face with a Kleenex. But it was Puffs Plus, right? It had the lotion in it. I mean, I went the full, I spent $3 on that thing of tissue. Come on. I mean, you think about it. That's what trauma bond is, okay? So it's not actually effectively helping you do anything. It's actually being caustic, right? And helping you actually devour yourself and lose your own identity in the process, clinging more to the trauma bond. Okay? See how it is? It's like, because when we start losing ourselves more and more, we start feeling insecure. We start feeling insecure. We start feeling stressful. We start feeling like we need somebody around us to feel better. And guess what? They're there. They're here. They're right here. Even though they're the exact person that's actually kind of co-creating the ruining of our life. Right? But the way that they present it is that, they're just glad we're here, because we wouldn't be able to nobody else would be able to deal with this, because we're so overwhelming to deal with, and so it's interesting how we begin to lose ourselves. One of another risk factors to be aware of is not having a support system, okay? And one of the things about the trauma bond that's so interesting, okay, and this is interesting, is that usually with the trauma bond, there's a time period where the other person is unhappy with your friends and family and other people in your life. And so, this is going back to our values again. So if we allow them to take over and we want to please them, what do? We start pushing everybody away. Right? We push everybody away because it's inconvenient. We push everybody away because the other person can't stand it. We don't want to have the argument. Right? We don't want to make them unhappy. We don't want to displease them. And so because we don't have that support group, we have a tendency of hearing that other person manipulate us over and over again, right? If somebody is consistently manipulating you and they have your ear all the time, how do you think that's going to work out? Because within that manipulation is what I call word salad, right? There's a combination of nicety. There's a combination of this kind of pseudo love. It's not real love. This pseudo love. There's a combination of manipulation. There's a combination of gaslighting. There's a combination of victimization. Right? So that's why we call it word salad, because everything has all these double meanings, and it's kind of gross after a while when you start looking at it. And so when we're surrounded by that manipulation, it can be really hard to understand where we stand because we're questioning ourselves. Also, another last couple of things that I want to talk about with the risk factors is being bullied in the past, being bullied before in the past, being pushed around in the past, being not validated. So when your feelings were not valid, when you're not validated, having that kind of background in the past as a child, growing up as a young adult is definitely key. But also that lack of personal identity. And what I mean by that is we all have an identity, but I'm talking about strengthening our identity so that we can completely understand when somebody's trying to take our autonomy. Okay? When somebody's trying to tell us that we are something that we're not. Okay. And the stronger our identity is to ourselves, the more we begin to understand. So when somebody is feeding us a line of BS and manipulation, we actually can begin to see it for what it is. And that's what I think is so important, because we have to see that for what it is to be able to break this. Okay. And that's critical. And we're going to talk about ways of getting out of it. But I want to talk about a couple of stages real quick, because I think that, this could also be eye-opening. It might not be eye-opening for a situation you're in, but it could be eye-opening for a situation that a friend's been dealing with. Because remember, when a friend or a family member is in a trauma bond, we don't realize it. We just think, oh, just break up with them. Hey, it's not working, just leave, Very much easier said than done. Okay. And it can be it's a very toxic experience. It plays on childhood core wounds. And so it's not really necessarily the person that's so hard to break up with. It's the program that's so hard to break up with. And the person, is just kind of the place setting, the figurehead of all this stuff that's mounted up since childhood. So it's really tough and challenging. And that's why, sometimes I know it can be hard to listen to friends and family that are going through it, but understand they have to get to the point where they see the light. They have to get to the point where they actually see the manipulation. And then they have to get to the point when they realize that they are not the names and the labels that the other person has given them. Now, see, this is really hard because a lot of times the labels and the names that were given them were things that came up when they were children as well. So it's really hard because they're trying to prove that they're not, but there's a possibility that they could be that. What if they are true? What if I am acting this way? And you see how you get into that blender of emotion because you start questioning, maybe they're right. Maybe I am mean. Maybe I am this. Maybe I am reactive. Maybe I am explosive. But it's actually seeing the truth for that and understanding that when somebody says that to you, has those labels for you, what's in the background of that? What were they wanting right after that? Like when they said that you're mean, or you're selfish, what was right before that led to that? What was it that they wanted? What is it that you weren't agreeing to? What was the boundary that you weren't letting them cross? Okay, this is just all super awareness, guys. And this is what we want. So let's talk about the stages. Then we'll talk about how to remove ourselves and begin to be awakened to the situation. So a lot of you know about the love bombing stage. We've done multiple videos on that here on our YouTube channel. Just go to Ashley Berges. You'll find the love bombing, which is all about the love and validation piece of a lot of these relationships, right? And that's what lures us into it, because we see this part of the relationship and it feels so good and we're getting all this attention and it feels really good, but we don't realize that that's not the truth. We don't realize that that's not going to stay. Okay? That's the lure in. That's like, back in the day when they used to do the drug, and remember the public service announcements, the drug videos where they say, they get you once with the free stuff, and then you got to come back and keep paying for it. I remember like the kids' PSA videos where you see the kid in the schoolyard getting the drugs. Anyway, it's interesting, but see, the fact is that you get lured into it. You get this love and this support and all this stuff that you want. We just don't realize it's not real. It's not here to stay. And that's where we begin. And then there's this trust part that we create in the relationship, and that's where we're divulging all this stuff about ourselves because we feel like we can, because we're in the safe zone, this treehouse of trust, right? where we start telling them everything about ourselves, past relationships, things that we've done that we're not proud of, things that scare us, our fear factors, our biggest fears, our biggest weaknesses. We begin to talk all about that. But see, we don't realize that that can be used against us. We think that we're telling us in the treehouse of trust and everything's safe and this is a really safe environment. There's no. See, we don't realize that. And so we give all this information that later on can be used against us and used to manipulate us with. When somebody knows your triggers and knows your buttons because you told them, right? That's where they get the information. And I'm not saying, oh, that was bad. I'm just saying we can't go backwards. Now let's make it right. So I understand some of you are saying, well, hey, I've been there. I'm already there. But how do I make it right? Then we go through the gaslighting phase, right? About how this is all your fault. And that you should be able to trust them. And that if you could just do what they say you should do, basically, everything's going to be fine, But then that's based on this subtle control, right? Control is everything. Because remember the interesting part about control is that it's not about telling somebody, you better do this or you better do that. It's the subtle control, right? So if somebody doesn't do what you want them to do, right? And then you all get home from dinner and maybe they hung out with people you didn't want them to hang out with. What happens? There's no intimacy, right? Maybe there's no conversation. Maybe there's the silent treatment. Just a little bit. Maybe what y'all were going to do tomorrow gets canceled. I can't make it. Subtle things. Okay? And then when you start acquiescing to what they want you to do, subtle things again, right? Subtle things of positive reinforcement. Okay? So you don't go out with your friends. You're going out with your friends. Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? I won't go out with my friends. Let's stay home and do something. Subtly reinforcing. Maybe they go in there and make something for you to eat. Maybe a hug, right? Maybe they sit closer to you on the couch. Various different little things to get you to do these things, but it never is really out in the open, right? It's all kind of a play-by-play kind of silent control manipulation game quietly on the down low that's unspoken. Right? But if we're not paying attention to it, we start going, oh, well, that felt good. I mean, wow, she's sitting closer to me on the couch tonight. Wow, she made some popcorn. That's really sweet. Right? But it's not always at the exact time that you've done something they want. They wait a little while and they bring it. Right? Just the same as that subtle pullback, that subtle undiscussed anger, that subtle you're not good enough for me to speak to type stuff. And, what happens, though, is as we go through that, trying to acquiesce and make them happy, we lose our sense of self. We lose our identity. And that becomes scary because we become confused, right? Our self-esteem gets lower because we're confused as to who we are and what we stand for. There's multiple levels of things that happen here, right? We become even more unhappy because then our happiness is actually toggled and tethered to their actions and attitudes about us. So it's no longer about us being happy for us being happy. It's based on how we're making them happy and how they're treating us becomes our basis of happiness. And that's where the cookie crumbles. That's where the issue is. And then eventually we have the addiction component, right? Where we get addicted to the ups and downs. We get addicted to those crumbs of validation. And it's hard for us to see the truth. So when we return, I'm going to give you some solutions, some nuggets of info to help if you're in this situation or if you have a friend that is. So stay tuned because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Berges, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes. Thank you. It's really warm in here. I don't know why it's so warm. Is my face all oily looking?
No.
Okay. I feel like it is. Thank y'all for all dealing with it today. Thanks for everybody tuning in here. I really appreciate it. I'm just so glad to see y'all. Now it's great to hear from you. It's been a roller coaster. Yes, I totally get it. Anna, greetings from Southeast England. Good topic today. I totally get it. I'm glad it's not your life anymore. Good work. Ammonia, great to hear from you. I wouldn't be able to talk about this stuff if I hadn't gone through it, because otherwise it would just be like going from some sort of textbook, right? You have to have really solved it, really gotten through it, overcome it, lived to tell the tale, recovered from it, and then waited like 5 to 10 years and then started helping other people, right? And that's really where it is. So yeah, I think in order to be successful at helping others, you had to have overcome it, survived it, and moved on for sure. Like a fairy. Only realized 4 to 5 months after leaving how toxic he was for me and that there was toxicity. I was used to excusing other people, anger, and problems. I just thought that was normal. I totally get it. I totally get it. Steven, we have to learn how to define ourselves. We don't need to validate others. Yes, great point. Ashley, great topic and so true about pushing boundaries. Yes, like a fairy. Wow, I love that. Perfect. Susie, I started documenting everything I saw as a red flag or abusive behavior. I also changed my tolerance level when I got to a point where I was absolutely would not accept BS no matter what. That's great. That's great. And documenting stuff really helps too in the relationship because then you can actually look back and see it instead of forgetting, right? Because we have a tendency of forgetting things when things are good, right? So that's one of the things that I think is interesting as well. Okay, let's see. Good point, Susie. Gwen, no support system. No one gets it. Totally get that. And that's why sometimes you need to work with somebody because if nobody's getting it, it's so challenging because you're trying to explain it. Then you find yourself explaining to other people as well, which is, creates another cycle pattern of programming of trying to prove our validation. Yes, Ashley, they do remove all your friends and family. So true. JJ Jonesy, this is why I had to go no contact with my family and boyfriend. No contact sometimes works because no contact helps you not deal with the manipulation. Once you open the line of communication again, if you're in the state of being able to be still manipulated by this person, you're putting yourself in a very toxic place. Back on. Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. On today's show, I've been talking about trauma bonds, and right before the break, I was talking about the 7 stages of trauma bonding and what it looks like, and if you've been through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's interesting how it's rinse and repeat, love bombing, the trust, the developing the trust, how the criticism and the put-downs begin, then the gaslighting and the manipulation, right? Then the control, right? Then we have the loss of ourself, right? And then we have the addiction component where we just keep doing it again. We got the good part. Okay, that's good. I forgot about the bad part. Oh, wait, I can't leave. We have all these different factors. I'm questioning my self-esteem, my self-worth, my self-value. I don't know who I am. I've lost my identity. And then we start losing our happiness because we're interfacing our happiness based on how happy they are. And that's based on what we're doing for them. So it's all a control, right? Because really, then all of a sudden, our happiness is like we're walking on eggshells. We don't want to get yelled at. We don't want to have all these problems. So we try to acquiesce and do what we're supposed to do based on this like subtle control that they're giving us. Because they're not really, most of the time when somebody's really, really good at manipulating, it's subtle. Now, it's not always subtle, but sometimes it can be very subtle. And sometimes the mask completely comes off, and the person will lose it. And when that happens, that's always interesting because a lot of times you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But when there's that much anger and hostility towards you, I want you to be aware that if somebody can go there, that's critical to understand that if you can go all the way to that extreme and you're trying to get me to believe that you love me, how do you say horrible, mean things that are outrageous and still turn around and try to convince me of your love? Okay. Some of the things that I've read from clients, you read that and it's like horrible. And the name calling and the abuse and the amount of profanity and calling someone out and everything else, it's horrible. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable behavior. And sometimes you might have to hear that from me to understand that that is not acceptable behavior. It is definitely not healthy. And you do not need to expose yourself to that. So the first thing that you can begin to do to offset, to at least begin to see the trauma bond, is to stop listening to what they're telling you about you. One of the biggest confusions that has happened and will happen in a trauma bond is that instead of being able to see who you are for you, you begin to listen to them tell you who you are. And usually it's based on problems. Usually it's about your insecurities. It's about your, it's about the things that you do wrong. It's about the things that you don't understand. It's about who you are. It's about you're selfish, you're mean, you're vengeful, you're evil, you're a piece of whatever. All these different things that are said. We need to identify ourselves. And so we need to stop listening to their identification of us, because we need to begin to realize that that's manipulation to keep us in the relationship, because obviously they feel scared that we're going to leave. They're scared of that, so they're calling us those names to keep us there, because we are fearful that nobody else will ever love us. We need to also begin to define our values separate from the relationship. And the way that you can begin to define your values right now, and I think one of the easiest ways to, instead of trying to figure it out from the ground up, is, what were some of the things that you've done in the last few months that have really upset you for this person? What are some of the things that you feel like you've had to sacrifice for this person? Take those sacrificing, take those concepts, and see what piece of you did you have to sacrifice to make this person happy? What piece of you did you have to sacrifice to make this person happy? And I mean that. So if it was like, if it was your independence and you had to, or if it was your family, if you had to cut your family out, and it hurt you to the core. Family is one of your core values. We need to start creating the values, understand what the values mean in our life, be able to assimilate a solid value regime, and to understand ourselves, so the next time that they try to topple over us and try to take from us and try to get us to sacrifice, right? If most of the time because of their future faking of what they telling us the relationship will be. And we just came out with a video this week on YouTube. It's what are like real promises versus future faking, how to know the difference there. And last but not least is that I want you to begin to see yourself. And if you can separately, if you're not having to live with this person, being able to communicate via email is a great way to stop some of the heavy manipulation, because we got to get out of the fog. We have to have some distance to get out of this manipulative fog. Okay. And if we're hearing it all day, every day, it's hard not to believe it, especially the negative things that they're saying about you. But I need you to be able to step back and analyze, because what they're going for is also triggers from you in your past, and understanding how you've disclosed that information and how they're using that against you. We'll be doing more shows on this subject and more subjects on how to understand these types of relationships, how to overcome them. If you haven't already, check out the website, ashleyberges.com, ashleyberges.com. Also, check out some of the new videos we have up on YouTube and some of the shows that we have here as well. We'll be back next week. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Berges, will be back in. Well, you know it. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes. Thank you, Brittany. Good work in the studio. Okay, we'll turn off the Lucy Live so that we're not going into the other show, because the other show will start in 1 minute. Anyway, great show. I'm so glad that so many of you who tune in, so many great people who tune in. Let's see. Men going their own way. The game. MGTOW. Narcissist parents make the son to have low self-esteem. Very much so. That's very true. Totally get it. Because it's all about them. Jess, my boyfriend makes fun of my friends and they're so nice to him. Yeah, you're making fun of them so that you start questioning your friends and find fault in them. Because he doesn't like them, because they're people that are, not his friends, and he can't control them so much. And it's interesting. He'll probably talk behind their back the moment he gets a chance. Cesar, long time to realize that she was bugging out, and now I regret it. Therapy for the second time on Tuesday. Good work. Narcissistic parents are controlling freaks. Yes, definitely. Pax and trauma bond is like being in contact with electrical charge. You are unable to pull away and break free. It can definitely feel that way, because it's all the programming too. And it goes back to those childhood wounds, because it's not just this person. You could place set anybody in that. It's not the person, it's the situation. Steven, emotional intelligence and fight or flight time. Yes, totally fight or flight. Inserter 400, can you talk about the discard phase? 23 years together and she walked away without a reason. Oh, the devaluation discard. It's very challenging. It can happen out of the blue, and it can be so black and white. Sometimes the discard phase, they can come back. Sometimes they can hoover back. And I'm going to be doing a show at some point on hoovering positively and negatively, because I've realized that there's two different types of hoovering. So a lot of times people only think about the positive hoovering, like, oh, I want you back and all that stuff. But also the hoovering can be negative, like very stressful, very manipulative. But yes, when somebody discards, it's extremely black and white thinking. And what's happened is usually in the discard, they've completely painted you black. And we can go on that on another show, because once they've done that, you know that you're dealing with someone that doesn't have a high emotional EQ, but you also realize that it's scary, because you have to find your identity at this point. We have to get really solid in that identity to build you back up, to find that power within, because we've linked our value to them and being in that relationship. And that's why it can be so painful, because we've done so many things for them. And then we've had that, breadcrumbing, as well as subtle reassurance. Love bombing sucks you into love bombing does suck you in, Susie. I found it much easier to stick up for myself when I figured out the legal and financial logistics of breaking up. That information is very important. Paxton, the smear campaign begins. That's true. Julie, so true. Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Big D business. I pray for the people dealing with narcs. Totally get it. I'm from Brazil. My family has lived down in Brazil. My brother and mother passed away from cancer and was getting ready to fight to go to the funeral. And I understand the support system is so important. It's hard when you don't have family. And it can be very, very challenging when you don't have a support group. And that can make you, more susceptible to this, it can be confusing. And, like a fairy, it can be confusing because, what is normal behavior? It's not normal behavior more as like, what is healthy behavior? It's two things, because our normal usually is what we were raised around, right? So, and Stu, thanks for tuning in. Does anyone have any advice on how to deal with a narc spouse that uses the kids as a communication piece between? Yeah, that's challenging, because especially if she's putting you down in the process, that's a challenging situation. I would try to offer to see if you can get into some sort of therapy, group therapy, where you can talk about this in a safe environment where you can discuss what you're not liking about the co-parenting. There needs to be some sort of accountability, because if she's going behind your back and talking to the kids about things she doesn't need to be, that's not a good position for the kids to be in. It's not going to help them psychologically. And there needs to be some boundaries that are created and some rules. It can be hard to enforce these rules, especially if somebody's willing to go to that extent. It can be challenging. I take a walk when I need to. Very important. All the crazy makes it horrible, Pamela. I see what you're saying, Julie. You're welcome. Hello from Arizona, Fanny. Great to have you. Ignacio, do you know there's something off with them, or they think they are totally normal? Do they know there's something off with them? Well, one of the things is that we have to be self-aware, right? And so if we're not self-aware, we don't realize that there's anything wrong with us. And remember, they're also in their own program of seeing themselves as the victim. Okay, so there's multiple programs running. And so if they're in the program of the victim because they don't see their own reality and they think that everybody else is the reason for their problems, they're not self-aware. And no, they won't change. But if they do become self-aware, and they do have the desire to begin to want to change, that's powerful. Gwen, yes, negative hoovering, I get it. I want to do a show on that because it's so true. It's just so true. And it's something that a lot of us could get a lot of information, because a lot of times we see hoovering as being a positive thing, like, oh, they want us back and they're showering us with love or gifts or whatever. But negative hoovering, like, saying that they're going to take you back to court, right? Or they're going to take your kids from you, or they're going to try to go back to court and get full custody. Okay. That's negative hoovering. Let's see. I always enjoy hearing motivational things. Thank you so much, Big D Business. Great to have you tuning in. Gwen, my entire identity is marriage, 24 years, no career. And I get it. And see, that's what's stressful, is that you've probably been lulled into that too. And that was on purpose, so that, your only, connection was that person. And that's when it can be so hard, because we got to figure out our identity. We have to recreate our life, because otherwise, they do that on purpose as a power. And they make you feel as though you needed that. And so you kind of got lulled into that reality. Inserter 400, thank you for explaining the discard. Any video to watch? I know that there's videos on the pedestal phase, the pedestal devaluation discard. I wouldn't know the exact link. Maybe George, you can add a link in there. We have a lot of stuff on the pedestal phase. We might have some stuff on devaluation discard. Do you want to look and see what we have? We'll try to put up some links here. And there's maybe, and I think there's also like a BPD video. What is it when you have all those videos together? Playlist. So there's a playlist. Oh, toxic relationship playlist. The toxic relationship playlist might actually have that on there instead of 400. Stu, great to have you. Thank you for tuning in. Asia, thank you for coming in and being here from Chile. So all in all, guys, this is the deal, is that if you think you're in this or you got a friend that's in it or whatever, but mostly ultimately we have to be able to see our truth and see our reality. We got to work on our value, our understanding who we are, what we value, what defines us, really write that out, journal it out to really understand that information. And the next time that somebody asks you to do something or they're pushing you, is this going to go against your boundaries? Does this go against your values? Because remember, I talk about this a lot. Values and boundaries are the same thing. It's not just random boundaries we have. The boundaries that we have are created based on our values. Okay, and that's why boundaries are so important. It's not just random stuff. It's about based on what we value and who we are and what we will and will not accept in our life. And when we can begin to create that, also some independence, this will help us with independence, but it'll also power us up in the relationship to saying no. Because just as much as we're fearful of them leaving, they're fearful of being left as well to most of the degree. So, you being scared of walking on eggshells, sometimes we got to push back, but you can't just push back randomly. You have to become the leader and you got to do it all the time. And I can explain how to do that. And that's what I do with a lot of my clients, but you can't ever put the leader role down. Okay, so we'll talk about that on another show. Thank you for tuning in. Takeover, thank you so much. Long time no see. Glad to have you back. And that's all that matters. Greetings from Peru. I love that. Be back next Saturday with a live show. We had Future Faking, the new video just put up a couple of days ago. Real promises versus future faking. Understanding future faking and how that is used to get us to sacrifice in the moment, where the person's promising us these things that never come to fruition. And they're based on our real deepest hopes and desires. And that's how we are manipulated, right? To stay in it. Atlas Moon, great to see you. Real love or pedestal phase? Yes, that is definitely one of the videos for sure. And I think it might be in the toxic relationships grouping. It might be in the playlist too, I think. I thank y'all so much for tuning in. I'll see you next Saturday. If you have any ideas for shows, please put in the comments, as well as if you'd like to connect with me or you have a question or want to work with me, just go to ashleyberges.com. You can click on that contact page and send me a message, and I will get back to you ASAP. Have a wonderful day. I want to dedicate this show to a friend of mine, Jared. I will be attending his funeral today. We were missing a great angel, but God bless. He survived. His son survived with his daughter, so I will be there later on today. Fanny, is there something I can read in regards to still being around the person who molested me as a child? I was not invited to my grandmother's B-day because her husband is a person. Wow. Ooh. Oh, that's a lot. That's really deep. Wow. I'm sorry that happened to you as well. Let me brainstorm. That I don't have anything on the top of my head that I would think would be a good read. One of the biggest things about that is if somebody hasn't come clean and apologize and walk through that, that can be really challenging to even be around a person like that. I don't know if I could do it. That would be challenging. And that's something you might want to ask yourself is this someone that you even want to be around? And when you're around them, how does it affect you? Because if they haven't come clean with it and they haven't begged for your forgiveness and all that stuff, that's a whole nother level there. Not that you have to accept their forgiveness or give them forgiveness, but at the same point, acknowledging what they've done is a big